what follows is our first panel discussion. I'm very much looking forward to hearing our panelists because the topic is constructive journalism. I've been in business for 27 years. First time I've heard of constructive journalism was last year. In this country, constructive journalism means, playing along the tune, reporting and not rocking the boat, offering pink spectacles to your audience and kind of like anesthesia. I've learned that constructive journalism is something else, and I'm very much looking forward to hearing more. Why does it work? How should it be crafted to work well? And as one of the panelists said, constructive news must not be mistaken to be irrelevant or sleek. It does work. So we will now test how. I would like the panelists to join me here. And we have Anne Lagercrantz, Director of News and Current Affairs with Swedish Public Service, Cynara Vetch, Project Lead, Constructive Institute, Denmark, and Michael Lally, Lead Researcher at Galway Centre for Arts and Media. Mr. Lally is coming from Ireland. I think, Anne, if you would like to start.
I think
okay. So I won't have it my way. You will be the first the first to speak. So the floor, Mr. Lally, is yours.
Thank you. It's a great pleasure and honour for me to be here this morning. Hopefully, between the three of us on the panel, you're going to go away with a fuller picture of constructive journalism. There's going to be overlap between what we say and indeed what the previous speaker has said. And that is due to the fact that there is commonality beginning to emerge as we define the challenges. I'm going to focus on switching on the switched off. I want you all to close your eyes and listen to this sound. Close your eyes, please. Thank you. You can open the eyes. I want you to hold that sound in your heads, in your brains, as we carry on. The role of journalism, of media, of public service media, in democracy, in engaging the citizens, is long accepted. Just focus on that idea. We are an active part of communicating and informing the citizens in order that they make informed decisions. Let's just accept that. I'm going to focus a lot on us, or what I used to be up until 1 year ago, a journalist. You probably can't see the detail there yet, but don't worry. This is the Veracity Trust survey that was carried out in the UK, 2017. Ipsos Mori, quite good. Simple question. For each of the following, would you tell me if you generally trust them to tell the truth or not? Okay, so they were the top 5. Nurses, doctors, teachers, professors, scientists. Estate agents, journalists, professional footballers, government ministers, and politicians generally. Let's just park that thought again. Little trust issue there for journalists and journalism. But the recent EBU Trust Survey on media was very good. Look at that blue map. Radio is the most trusted medium in Europe. This is only as of 2 weeks ago. This is public service media we're talking about. Trust in TV still remains stable. Social networks are the least trusted in Europe. See all that red? But this is another fact or statistic to hold in your head. Public service media are the most trusted news brands.
Sorry, excuse me, what is PSM?
PSM, public service media. So, PSM are the most trusted news brand in North and Central Europe. So journalists, not greatly trusted. The brand, trusted. So how does that reflect in terms of audience? Audience figures for public service media across Europe declining since 2012 at 3 to 4% per annum. Compound that over 10 years, 25 to 30% drop. It's not confined to Europe. Newsrooms in the US in that 2008-2017 period, employment in newsrooms right across the board, radio, television, and online, declined by 23%. I mention online because sometimes we think online is the protected species. In the month of February of this year, between BuzzFeed, AOL, Yahoo, and the Huffington Post, 1,000 journalists were laid off in that 1 month. The UK government, when they were not preoccupied with another single issue, commissioned a report on regional newspaper journalism. That was published late last year. Again, that 10-year period, 300 local newspapers closed, 6,000 journalists had been made redundant in the UK in that same period. And the stated concern in that government commissioned report is that the absence of regional news will actually put democracy at risk. I must credit my good friend Mia Costello with this wonderful caption, photograph, because that's the question we have to answer. Why are people switching off? And you know what? The research is all there. 48% say it can have a negative effect on my mood. Now, this research is from Reuters Oxford Institute, it's from the Pew Center, it's from the Edelman Trust Survey. It stands up as research. 37% can't rely on the news to be true. 28% don't feel there is anything they can do about it. And on and on and on. You can look at all of these figures, and if you're like me, up until 12 months ago, you will dismiss them, because what would academics know about the real world of journalism? Let's go back to what should be the real values of public service media journalism. Maybe we don't emphasize them enough. Truth and accuracy, accountability, independence, impartiality, reporting in the public interest, which is not the same as reporting on what the public are interested in, reporting in the public interest. I had the great pleasure of working with Mia Costello on an excellent course that Fernando and Oliver, who I'm sure is here this morning as well, from the European Parliament, where we spent 6 days in Brussels with a wonderful group of journalists from your stations working on how do you engage the public with the European elections. And this was last November and February. And we asked that group to come up with their ideas on what constitutes a worthwhile value system, what should be in a news programme. I call them the Brussels criteria. It's all of the stuff that we're talking about. It's that the public must accept, without question, that what we're giving them is independent, it's unbiased. And this group were introduced to the constructive concept, which you're going to hear a lot more about in this panel game. And they bought into it. And some of them were hardened journalists with a lot of history and saying, do you know what? I never thought about it before. The one that has caught my attention, that question, why should I care? That's the elephant in the room. And that's the one that we don't often talk about. It was mentioned earlier. The political one. Get closer to the audience and further away from politicians. The quote you had, public service is unavoidably political, but this relationship should not be unhealthy. Because it's in the interest of both the politicians and the media that the public trust us. Because what's at stake, and this is the message that has to be hammered home, is actually the future of democracy. So how do you switch on the switched off? We have the trusted brand. Let's not compromise it in any shape or form. I genuinely believe we have to start retraining our journalists. I think we have to refocus our editors so what they're commissioning and what they're looking for moves away from the present day agenda. The values of PSM, of public service media, they have to be put back on the table and enshrined in what we do. And we have to manage the political relationship. And that will help us decide whether that is the sound we hear again, the death toll for journalism as we know it, or do we accept it as a wake-up call? Because that, for me, is the stark choice. I've spent 30 years in this business. I'm now in the protected species world of academia. And I now honestly must say that what I have given you, backed up with a lot of research, is actually my own personal journey. I came from being completely agnostic about the area that I'm now speaking about. I genuinely believe that if we're to move forward, we have to challenge ourselves, we have to become very uncomfortable, or else the bell will toll for us. And I want to introduce Cynara Vetch. Thank you.
I was thinking if it's more convenient, you can stay where you are. But you have a presentation. Oh yeah. Just while you are looking for it, maybe we could get the assistance again. Možda da nam se dečko iz tehnike pridruži, a bilo bi lepo I da ne izlazi iz sobe. Cynara Vetch is coming from Denmark.
Yeah. Hi everyone, it's great to be here, and I'm going to build on what Michael's been saying, and basically look at if we accept that there is this lack of trust in news media and we do have falling audiences, is constructive journalism an approach? Is constructive journalism an approach that could help with these issues? And then when I want to play the video, I just click through as well.
Yeah, just click the next and he will play you.
Okay. And I'm also going to tackle the question at the beginning where basically is constructive journalism propaganda, supporting governments, not asking difficult questions. So I'm going to start with why we think constructive journalism, what it actually is, and then how we are working at the Constructive Institute to implement it.
Development of the world over the past decade. Do you feel more... Dear viewer, are you optimistic about the future? This is a social experiment. It requires nothing of you except a few minutes of your time. But don't worry, we'll make it worth your while. Let's begin. Think about the development of the world over the past decade. Do you feel more secure now than 10 years ago? Yes or no? Now think about the next 10 years. Will it get better? Yes or no? Don't worry, there are no right or wrong answers here. But if you are like most people, you've answered no twice. The fact is, almost no one believes the world is becoming a better place.
Of denial and claim.
What makes us so pessimistic about the state of the world, when the fact is that in so many ways the world has never been better? We live longer, are healthier. In most countries, crime rates are going down. In Africa, more people now die from diabetes than from starvation. And in the history of mankind, never have so few people died in wars than in 2017 and 2018. That's a story we don't hear very often. And that's because long-term trends don't get as much news coverage as sudden occurrences such as an economic collapse. The constant bombardment with bad news creates fear, mistrust, and apathy. It paves the way for populism, polarization, and fake news. We want to change the rules of news coverage so that we don't just see half the picture, but get the full story. We want to help journalists and news organizations create constructive news that not only asks why bad things happen and who's to blame for them, but also what do we do about it and how do we proceed? It's not that news shouldn't cover the real problems, but what about progress? We want to change the global media landscape within the next 5 years, and we need your help. Because democracy needs trusted information from skilled, balanced, and credible journalists, both to speak truth to power and to inspire potential solutions to the problems facing all of us. Journalism is important. And the next time you read or watch the news, think about this. Perspective matters. Broaden yours.
So that's our why. This is why we think it's important. But what is it, and how can we work with you to implement it? So I'm a project lead at the Constructive Institute, which was based and born in Denmark Radio, in public service media, where the executive director, Ulrik Hagerup, had an epiphany that although he believed that news was to strive for the best obtainable version of the truth, the news output from Denmark Radio was actually very skewed towards the negative and skewed towards the conflict. And so he spent about 10 years within the system coming up with new approaches and programs that could rewrite this to a more nuanced and two-eyed view of the world. And in 2017, he set up the Institute so that he could work with newsrooms and organizations beyond DR. And we do this in a number of ways, but first I want to tackle that question of what is constructive journalism. So, can I have some technical help? The most important thing to realize is that we're not trying to rewrite the rule book. We still very much believe in the importance of breaking news, which informs people with the latest information and keeps them up to date with the news that they need. And we're hugely supportive of investigative reporting, which holds truth to power. But we believe that there needs to be a third leg to connect these two and to rewrite the kind of negative slant.
You have a video on that? No? Yes?
I have a what?
Play it.
Okay, great. So if you see here, breaking news and investigative reporting remain very central to what we believe in, but we want to complement them with these constructive elements. So if you think of breaking news as analyzing what is happening right now, it's as fast as you can get it to the consumer. And it's asking the questions of what is the issue, when did it happen? It has a very dramatic style, and the more dramatic, the more the attention it will get. And it's the role of a policeman, giving you the key bits of information you need to make the choices that you need to. It's very dramatic, and it's often full of conflict. Investigative reporting is about yesterday. What went wrong? Who's to blame for it? Why did it happen? And there's a very critical angle to this. Who are the victims, who are the perpetrators? And often the journalist acts as a judge and sentences whose head needs to roll, who needs to be fired. With constructive journalism, we're saying, let's finish that circle of investigative reporting. We found out who perpetrated the issues in our society. We found out why they happened. What next? Do we just go on to the next problem? Or do we actually examine what can be done now for this not to happen again in the future? Can we find people that have solved this problem? And it's a much more curious tone, bringing different people together to have conversations where they can learn from each other. So now the journalist acts rather than a policeman or a judge, but as a facilitator. And we do this through three approaches. The first being, when we bring up these challenges and problems that our society faces, can we look at the solutions that maybe people in other countries, in other sectors, have brought to bear on them? And can we bring this as part of the story? Secondly, what about nuance? News can often be about the extremes, the terrible things that have gone wrong, and maybe every now and then the exceptional hero that goes the extraordinary story of the ordinary person. But we live in the grey, we live in the shades of grey. And how do we tell stories about this? The complex stories about the everyday. And the last one is this facilitation role. Rather than having the split screen on the TV where we ask, what do you think about it? Why do you disagree with him? And actually develop conflicts within our reporting. How do we create calm, safe spaces where people can have discussions and actually learn from each other at the same time as the audience is learning? So we do this in a number of ways. We have deep engagement with a selected group of journalists who come to the Institute and really explore these issues for 10 months and then go back into their workplace. So from the keynote speech, the last clip about the Funen example, where all these different local organizations came together, one of the journalists from that was actually on that project. She's been with us for 10 months now, and then she's going to go back into the workplace as the world's first constructive news editor and see how a regional public service media can actually change their whole newsroom approach to news. But obviously we can't work with all the journalists in this deep way. So we also work with a network, a global network of different news organizations, journalism schools, and academics who are looking to do news differently. And this map is from our global annual conference, where we had 500 plus people from 50 plus countries. And we're working in different ways to support this. So we're setting up a digital platform which shares best practices and explains what's been tried, what's working, and what lessons can be learned. We also have an annual journalism prize, because we've seen that often the journalism work that gets celebrated is either the images of conflict and the most shocking, or the stories which are about what's going wrong in our society. And so we've set up an annual prize to celebrate the journalism that's looking at solutions and stories where people have tackled these challenges. And we're also seeing that algorithms exacerbate this tendency for conflict and sensationalism. So we've just won a Google D&I award, which helps journalists identify what's constructive within news articles, and so that newsrooms can have an understanding of, do we have a negative slant that maybe we can't even see right now with our reporting? So as we support these journalists, we understand that sometimes it's not enough to say, okay, we're going to take a constructive approach. We need to have scalable, replicable formats that people can use in different ways across their different newsrooms. So we also run a series of projects to develop tools and solutions. And this is one of them. We went to Colombia to do a pilot project where we were looking at how to use constructive journalism in a post-conflict setting. And we set up this manual where journalists can look at, now we've reported about the war, we've reported about the conflict. How do we talk about peace building? How do we talk about communities coming together after the war's ended? We've also worked together with an NGO to create an app which looks at these difficult decisions that journalists make on a day-to-day basis. What image most expresses my headline? Is it the shocking one, or is there something more subtle I can do? How do I, as a foreign affairs editor, tackle the issues in Africa? How do I get beyond the stereotypes? And then finally, we're working on journalism education. So we're rolling out a curriculum in the folk high schools in Denmark, where we can work with young, next generation of journalists to reimagine what it means to be a journalist. So, despite the technical difficulties, I want to say that it's really great to be with you here, because we do really want to work with organizations such as yours. Regional public service media is so important. You're a trusted news source, and you're close to the communities you serve. And those are the newsrooms and the journalists that we want to work with to look at new approaches so that we can bring back these audiences and rebuild trust in journalism. Thank you.
Daily news program, investigative journalism, and what you call constructive journalism. So what is your advice? Does the constructive journalism come as a complementary to the hard news programs? Because clearly we will always need daily reporting, which answers to the questions that you listed. So do we switch? Do we totally forget good news is no news? Or do we switch to completely? Could you make a hard news program with this solely constructive approach?
No, I mean, I think that's a great question. And I wouldn't say that the first column is daily news. I would say it's general straight news, any news report. And, you know, sometimes constructive journalism is not appropriate. If a bomb's just gone off, I don't want to know how that's going to affect me tomorrow. I don't want to know the nuance. I want to know the key information as it unrolls. But day 3, when you're still telling me, and you're just giving me more numbers of how many people have been affected by that bomb attack, is there not something beyond that with more nuance that we can look at that story and say, what is the more complexities around that? How can we avoid this happening again? What does this mean in a wider context? And so I think it's just a complementary approach to say, it's not wrong what we've been doing, but is it the real view of the world? Is everything a disaster constantly? Or are we zooming in on key issues that we've been told are news and failing to zoom out and actually depict what's going on in our society as a whole?
Michael, do you want to add something, or can we?
I think Anne.
And the floor is yours.
Presentation. Yes. I would like to tell you about a digital transformation that has been painful but quite successful. And Constructive News is an integrated part of that transition. It's not a temporary project or a thing on the side. It's really in our core, and it's in our strategy. I want to focus on our main digital offer, in which local news is an extremely important part. About 50% of our total reach consists of people visiting local stories. And my organization holds national news, sports, and local news. We're about 850 employees in 37 local news offices. And I joined SVT 3.5 years ago, and we really heard your bells, Michael. This was the situation then. Our audience was an aging one, and of course, you know, this is not unique for Sweden, but it has to be addressed. The average age of a person watching our evening newscast is plus 65 years of age. We had a weak digital position and performed poorly during breaking news. Just after I joined, the Paris attacks broke, and we really performed disastrous. Our reaction time and our coverage, we had so much to deal with, and it took us hours before we were live on air. So what we did was a thorough job analyzing our position and the audience needs. And these are images from the project that Atte mentioned. It's Fika with SVT. And of course, this was one of the projects. We did traditional research as well with surveys and demographical studies. But this is co-workers from all newsrooms in Sweden inviting the audience to have fika. And fika is a deeply rooted Swedish tradition where we have coffee and we have cinnamon buns, but it's also, more importantly, an opportunity for an informal exchange of information. And we had these fikas all around Sweden and asked our audience, how do you consume news? What do you appreciate and what do you lack in our coverage? And the audience, it really reflects the views, the slides you showed us. They thought that we were concentrating too much on misery, on concerns, that we were too elitist and too focused on covering the capital of Stockholm, not on their reality. And it's important to stress that this was not marketing. It was us listening and learning. And locally, the newsrooms were already adapting to change after a major reorganization in 2015. But in 2016, we focused on the national news and found big issues to address. And one of the most fundamental was our heavy broadcasting legacy. And we decided to allocate more research sources to online, and which is quite controversial. We separated the online operations from the broadcast operations. We did a brand job for all our news offerings, and our pledge, this is what we ended up with, our pledge to svt.se's users is with independence and commitment to rapidly provide you with a whole picture. And it's linked to foundational pillars. And for instance, the pillar interesting perspectives consists of us providing an opportunity for further research, explanatory journalism, investigative pieces, and constructive journalism. And to encourage this strategy and to really celebrate success, we're also handing out an award to co-workers who succeed in the best reporting connected to these pillars. And just to give you an example, we truly want to excel in constructive journalism, and it has been an unfortunate understanding, I think, in the whole industry that constructive journalism is happy journalism. It's not, and I think that perception is changing. It's about looking into the future and what happens next, and it marries so well with investigative journalism. So these are two of the films that were shortlisted in our internal award. No luck with the films today. Ah. Yay!
Konstruktiv journalistik.
Första dagen var inte så rolig. Det var väl ett helvete i början.
SVT Nyheter Örebro för publiceringen om hur hemmasittande ungdomar som 17-årige Sami får hjälp tillbaka till skolan.
Ett citat som ligger nära mitt hjärta är att ni kanske inte har räddat mitt liv, men mitt skolliv.
Hur många sådana här trappuppgångar har du städat med? En?
Ja.
Det är din första trappuppgång?
Ja.
SVT Nyheter Väst för rapporteringen om hur ett jobbprojekt med trappstädning kan lyfta en hel familjs självkänsla.
Vad tänker du om att mamma har ett jobb?
Det är roligt. Alltså, man kan vara stolt över att hon har ett jobb.
And these are the winners at the annual gala, and I'm proud to have some of the winners in the room today, Anna-Klara Banker and Emil Larsson, who are also the winner of the CIRCOM category Minorities in Society. And again, handing out awards, it's about celebrating success, and it serves as a reminder of our strategy. And here are some concrete digital examples of how we implement the strategy. So again, the brand promise is to rapidly provide the whole picture, and it's about putting every piece of news in the center and trying to approach it from several perspectives. And here's on the same problem as you saw in the video about kids staying at home from school. So you have two constructive news angles about a project encouraging friends to attend school, and a girl who helps out in the project. And then an explainer, researcher about why kids stay at home, and a guide, how do different municipalities help out. And here's a climate example. It's news from a magazine program. It's a guiding map, facts. It's a case from a guy in the southwest part of Sweden who started a petrol uprising. Here's a storm with breaking news, guide, and explain it with our weatherman talking about strong winds. And the last example is from Kiruna, up north in Sweden. You see different news angles, a video explainer on the importance of the mine for the Swedish state finance. And related is a guide allowing us to explore the mine, a background about the ore in the mine running out in a faster pace than anyone believed it would. And you can see it's trying to provide the whole picture and giving more perspectives. And when it comes to constructive news specifically, some of our local newsrooms they really adopted the perspective, as well as our flagship news broadcast show, 7:30. So we have a lot of work to do, but slowly it's becoming a natural part of our work. We've connected editorial with tech and made product strategies for all our news outlets. So these are our digital objectives. And you can see how we connect them to necessary success factors, strategic metrics or KPIs, and activities. We've also created personas to illustrate target groups for all our different news offerings. So this chart with 9 personas is divided into progressivity, how curious and interested in news are you, and age. So, of course, it's simplified, but it's based on empirical research and audience behavior. So it's not fingers in the air. And for instance, our local news on TV, they work towards middle-aged, moderately progressive Annie and Anders. And online, our local news, they're trying to attract a younger audience. It's Sahar and Seb, who are 20 to 39-year-olds. And of course, these personas overlap, but I think it's important that we will not be successful or relevant if we strive to reach everyone at every time with all our content. And now, as I mentioned, we're looking into local news, and the current change is about allocating more content to and more resources to align to investigative journalism, to more specialists, and to create greater autonomy for online. And these are some results of our strategic work so far. When it comes to unique visitors, we are the fastest growing news site in Sweden for the second consecutive year. And you can, on the chart, you can see the comparison with the general election and the Olympics. In our election last autumn, we almost doubled the amount of first-time voters who turned to us as their most important source of information. Only Facebook beat us. And when it comes to our most important currency, trust, our high level in broadcast remains, and we surged upwards digitally. 73% trust our digital offering now compared to 53% last election. And public service, as Michael mentioned, has in Sweden historically enjoyed an extremely high level of trust. But as you can see, the levels are declining, still high. But you can actually see a bit of a positive change this year. And it's, of course, it's early days to see a shift, but we can certainly say that it has leveled out. Our weekly reach among our target audience, 20 to 39-year-olds, has risen by almost 13%, while our competitors are either losing reach or remaining at the same level. And same applies to the whole population of 16 to 80-year-olds. We're also, for the first time, listed as one of Sweden's most purposeful digital brands. And just to summarize, I think these are some success factors. The audience demand for context and understanding, and again, several perspectives, clear objectives, and more autonomy, especially for the national news, and more online specialists. And I think this will probably change in a few years. Everything will be more integrated, but for us it's been a way of truly breaking the broadcast legacy. So thank you.
Thank you very much. The problem that I have here as a moderator is we're running out of time. The guys from BBC's Blue Room are already here. They have a fantastic presentation. I had the opportunity to see it at the similar conference. It would be a shame to let you go without at least one question. Are there questions from the audience?
And I think we're all here to answer questions during the break.
Yeah, sure.
During the break over coffee.
My brief question would be, there were two interesting data. Michael said from 2007 to 2017, 300 local media were closed. Anna said that a Swedish public broadcaster has 37 regional offices. That is beyond imagination in Serbia. We don't have money. Our newsrooms are shrinking. There are less and less people working. How do you go to remote places in your country? How do you collect stories how do you spend 5 weeks in a small provincial town gathering stories? How do you make your management understand it is important?
We used to have, only 10 years ago, or before 2015, we had 27 news offices. So we put a lot of effort into more lean production and working only with video journalism. So we're much more effective today than we used to be. I think it's a matter of trying to prioritize. It sounds easy, but now we're trying to make more in-depth stories and have the rest in a simple overview, because a lot of things we do, it's kind of in between, and it's about trying to do less of that.
Yeah. Michael, do you have to add anything?
No, I think it's not just a question of taking things in isolation and taking small elements. It's to look at the big picture. One quick point, you were asking about, as Cynara was saying, so when the bomb goes off, yes, that story has to be covered. No question about that. Two very quick points. I think constructive journalism is very close in nature and operation to investigative journalism. The second point, it's not just in the one story that goes out that should reflect constructivity. It's the overall package of your news program that should reflect everyday lives and relevance for the audience.
Thank you very much.